The weave trembled. In Candlekeep's highest tower, a young wizard dropped her quill as arcane equations rewrote themselves across parchment. In the Underdark, drow priestesses felt Lolth's fury ripple through their prayers. Across the Sword Coast, every diviner, oracle, and chosen of Maestra gasped as reality itself stuttered. Something impossible had pierced the veil between worlds. The planar tear opened above the ruins of Dragonspear Castle, a wound in the fabric of existence that bled crimson light across the twilight sky. What emerged was no demon, no devil, no aberration from the far realm. The figure that descended on crackling energy was something Faerun had never witnessed. An emperor from a reality where magic obeyed different laws, where monsters were manufactured rather than born, and where a single tyrant's will could reshape entire worlds. Lord Zedd stood amid the rubble, his skeletal frame wrapped in exposed crimson muscle and silver armor, the metallic faceplate concealing whatever remained of his face. The Z-staff in his clawed hand pulsed with energy that made the weave recoil. He surveyed the primitive stonework, the distant lights of civilization, the three moons hanging in an alien sky. A low, rasping laugh echoed across the wasteland. "Pathetic," he declared, his voice reverberating with power. "The Rangers thought banishing me would be my end. Fools. They've granted me a virgin conquest, a realm ripe for the taking." He slammed the Z-staff into scorched earth. Dark energy exploded outward, and the ruins began to shift. Stone flowed like water, reshaping itself according to his will, or a fortress erupted from the ground, twisted spires of black metal and crimson crystal, architecture that belonged to no culture of Tyrell. Within moments, a palace of nightmares towered over the landscape, its central throne room crowned with a viewport that gazed toward Waterdeep's distant lights. But something was wrong. Zedd staggered, gripping his staff as unfamiliar sensations flooded through him. The magic here, it resisted him. Not refused, resisted. Like trying to breathe water instead of air. His power remained vast, but channeling it through this world's arcane currents required adaptation he hadn't anticipated. What manner of sorcery? He steadied himself, extending his awareness. Ah. This realm had structure to its magic, patterns and rules his reality-warping abilities couldn't simply ignore. Interesting, challenging, but ultimately irrelevant. He was Lord Zedd, conqueror of dimensions. He would master this weave as he'd mastered everything else. The fortress thrummed with dark energy as Zedd began his first experiment. He'd need servants, soldiers, monsters. His putty patrollers couldn't manifest here. Wrong dimensional frequency. But this world provided alternatives. From his throne room, Zedd observed a merchant caravan traveling the tradeway below. With a gesture, he seized a broken wagon wheel and a dead horse from earlier bandit activity. The Z-staff blazed. Transmutation magic, twisted, wrong, filtered through alien understanding of reality, forced matter to obey. The wheel and corpse merged, reshaped, grew. A chimera of wood and rotting flesh lurched to life. 8 feet of nightmare with wheel-spoke limbs and a horse's skull mounted on a barrel chest. It screamed. Zedd smiled. Yes, yes. This world's magic is crude but responsive. I'll forge an army from your refuse and ruins. In Waterdeep, 90 miles north, the alarm had already been raised. The Blackstaff Tower's divination chamber erupted with warning signals. Vajra Safar, the Blackstaff herself, stood before a scrying pool that showed Zedd's fortress materializing. Around her, the masked lord's representatives and Harper agents watched in growing horror as the skeletal emperor raised his second monster, this one crafted from a broken plow and 3 murdered farmers. "Who is he?" demanded Laeral Silverhand, open lord of Waterdeep, her hand instinctively moving to her sword. "No, what manner of lich commands transmutation like that?" "Not a lich," Vajra murmured, her eyes glowing with arcane sight. "His magic. It doesn't draw from the weave properly. He's forcing it, bending our reality to match something else. This is extraplanar, but not from any plane I recognize." A Harper agent in a dark leathers stepped forward. Remalia, Remy, Haventry, one of their best investigators. The ruins of Dragonspear Castle, perfect location. isolated, already corrupted by past events, and close enough to threaten the tradeway. If he cuts off our commerce routes, he won't get the chance, Laryl interrupted. Vajra, can you teleport a strike force? The Black Staff hesitated. The magical distortion around his fortress is intense. I could get them there, but extraction, I can't guarantee it. We need more information. And we're sending adventurers into the unknown against an enemy who casually violates the laws of magic. Then we gather information first, Remy said quietly. I'll take a team. Scout his capabilities. Determine if he's working alone or if he's allied with known threats. The Gentarim have been quiet lately. Too quiet. And that kind of power? They'll come sniffing. Laryl nodded grimly. Go, find out what we're dealing with, but Remy, if he's what I fear, if he's building an army. She didn't finish. They all understood. Waterdeep had survived dragons, demon lords, and the return of ancient evils. But something in the way reality bent around that distant fortress suggested this threat might be different. Meanwhile, in the Nine Hells, a different kind of attention focused on the planar breach. Glazia, Lord of the Sixth, he felt the dimensional fabric tear and smiled. In the Abyss, Grazist paused mid-sentence during negotiations with a succubus general, his six-fingered hand rising for silence. And in Cyric's domain, the Mad God laughed with delight at the chaos potential this newcomer represented. But it was Bane, the Black Lord, god of tyranny, who acted first. In his iron fortress, he gazed through divine sight at the skeletal emperor raising monsters from refuse. Here was ambition. Here was the will to dominate. Here was potential. Send the Dark Promise to him, Bane commanded his highest cleric. Let us see if this Lord Zedd understands the proper hierarchy of power. If he kneels, he may serve. If he refuses, the cleric bowed. And if he proves worthy of neither service nor destruction, my lord? Bane's avatar smiled, sauté expression of pure malice. Then he'll make an excellent example of what happens to those who would claim dominion in my world without permission. Back at Dragonspear, Lord Zedd stood atop his highest spire, the Z-staff raised toward Waterdeep's lights. His first 20 monsters shambled in the courtyard below, grotesque fusions of debris and death. It was a beginning, a foundation. Power Rangers, he whispered to the alien stars above. You thought you'd seen the last of me, but you've given me something better than your pathetic world. Here, I'll build an empire that spans dimensions. Here, I'll show you the true meaning of conquest. Dark energy crackled around the fortress as Zedd began drawing deeper from the weave, learning its patterns, bending it to his will. The god of magic herself would soon take notice. Heroes would rise to oppose him. Factions would scheme and plot. But Lord Zedd had conquered 1,000 worlds in his reality. What was one more? If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. The war for Farron had begun. 3 days after the planar tear, Waterdeep's most notorious tavern, the Yawning Portal, became an impromptu war council. Remy Haventree spread a hand-drawn map across the ale-stained table, her fingers tracing the route to Dragonspear. Around her sat the assembled party. Torvin Battlehammer, a shield dwarf paladin of Torm, whose hammer had seen 100 battles. Silra Moonwhisper, a half-elf ranger whose arrows never missed. Kess, a human rogue with more secrets than scars. And Fenna, a dragonborn sorcerer whose wild magic made her as dangerous to allies as enemies. Durnan, Remy called to the innkeeper. Tell them what your regulars reported. The grizzled proprietor leaned against the bar, his expression grim. Caravans are disappearing on the tradeway. Not bandits, monsters. Things that shouldn't exist. A merchant who escaped described something with wagon wheels for arms and a horse's corpse for a head. Killed 6 guards in minutes. Abominations, Torvin rumbled, his beard bristling with disgust. Transmutation magic twisted toward evil ends. The work of a necromancer? Worse, Remy said quietly. The Blackstaff believes he's something extraplanar. His magic doesn't follow our rules. You watch. She produced a crystal that projected Vajra's scrying images. Zedd raising monsters from debris, his fortress warping reality around it, the alien energy of the Z-Staff. Fenna's draconic eyes widened. By Bahamut's wings, that's not weave magic. It's like he's rewriting reality instead of channeling it. No components, no verbal incantations, just pure will in that staff. Can he be killed? Kess asked bluntly, already checking her daggers. Everything can be killed, Silra murmured, her keen eyes studying Zedd's skeletal form. The question is what it costs. Remy rolled up the map. The Harpers want reconnaissance first. Get close, observe his capabilities, identify weaknesses. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. If he's building an army, we need to know numbers, composition, and whether he's working alone. And if the Gentarum are already courting him? Torvin's question hung heavy. Then we have bigger problems than monsters. They departed at dawn, following the tradeway south. The journey took 2 days, and the signs of Zedd's influence grew more disturbing with each mile. Merchant corpses transmuted into twisted guardians that patrolled the roadside. A burned farmhouse where the family had been fused with their livestock into a writhing mass of flesh and farming implements. Silra put 3 arrows into it before it stopped screaming. "Merciful Sylvanus," the ranger whispered, her usual composure cracking. "What kind of monster creates that?" "One who sees living beings as raw materials," Remy answered, her jaw tight. "Keep moving. We're getting close." Dragonspear's ruins appeared on the 3rd evening, but the ruins were gone. In their place stood Zedd's palace, a nightmare of black metal and crimson crystal that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The architecture defied conventional design, spires that twisted at impossible angles, walls that appeared solid from one perspective and translucent from another, a central throne room visible through reality-warping viewports. The party took position on a ridge overlooking the fortress. Through Remy's spyglass, they observed the courtyard. 50 monsters now, possibly more inside. Each one a unique horror crafted from whatever materials Zedd found. Broken carts, dead animals, discarded armor, even stones and trees. They shambled in crude formations, responding to some unheard command. And there, on the highest balcony, stood Lord Zedd himself. He was performing another creation. The Zedd staff blazed as he seized 3 dead goblins from a recent skirmish and a shattered siege weapon. The transmutation was faster now, more confident. Within seconds, a 15-foot monstrosity lurched to life. Goblin faces screaming from a torso of twisted wood and iron, trebuchet arms capable of hurling boulders. "He's learning," Fenna breathed. "His magic is adapting to the weave, getting stronger." Torvin gripped his holy symbol. "Torm, grant me strength. We cannot let this continue. Each day he grows more powerful, creates more abominations." "Wait." Kess pointed to the forest road approaching the fortress. "We have company." A contingent approached under a black banner marked with a winged serpent, the Gentarum. Beyond 20 soldiers in dark armor escorted a palanquin carried by 4 ogres. When it stopped at the fortress gates, a woman emerged, tall, elegant, wearing robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver runes. Her presence radiated authority. "That's Manshun's emissary," Remy hissed. "The Gentarum are making their move." The gates opened, not by any mechanism, but by Zedd's will. Reality simply decided the gates were open. The delegation entered, and the party watched helplessly as political machinations they couldn't prevent unfolded below. Inside the throne room, Lord Zedd regarded his visitors with barely concealed contempt. The emissary, who introduced herself as Silua Darkhope, Hand of Manshun, bowed with practiced deference. "Lord Zedd, the Gentarum extend greetings and recognition of your impressive display of power. Yet we come with an offer of alliance." "Alliance?" Zedd's laugh was like grinding stone. "You presume much, woman. I am an emperor. You are insects scurrying beneath my notice." Silua's smile never wavered. "Insects who know this world's secrets, the locations of magical artifacts, the weaknesses of our enemies, the political landscape you'll need to navigate. Alone, you're powerful, but ignorant of Farron's true dangers. The Harpers are already moving against you. Waterdeep's lords are gathering armies. and forces beyond mortal ken are taking notice. Let them notice. Zedd stood, the Z-staff crackling. I've conquered dimensions. This realm will fall like all the others. Dimensions that didn't have gods who personally intervene. Silua's tone sharpened. Dimensions that didn't have ancient dragons who remember the world's creation. Are dimensions that didn't have archmages who can unmake you with a word. Power without knowledge is merely loud failure, Lord Zedd. We offer knowledge. Zedd paused. He hated admitting it, but the woman had a point. His initial creations had been crude because he didn't understand this world's materials, its magic, its hierarchies. The weave still resisted his commands, requiring more effort than his reality warping should demand. And these gods, she mentioned. What do you want in return? The Gentarum seek influence, not conquest. We want Waterdeep weakened, the Lord's alliance fractured. When you claim your empire, we wish to be your administrators, the bureaucracy that transforms conquest into lasting dominion. You want to use me as your weapon. We want to ensure your success. There's a difference. Silua gestured, and one of her soldiers produced a tome bound in black leather. This contains everything we've learned about Waterdeep's defenses, the Blackstaff's capabilities, and the locations of magical sites that could amplify your power. A gift, to demonstrate our good faith. Zedd took the tome, his alien mind already calculating. These Gentarum were ambitious parasites, certainly, but useful parasites. For now. Very well, I accept your information. In return, you may tell your master that I will not interfere with Gentarum operations. But understand this, Silua Darkhope. The moment I no longer need you, the moment you presume to command rather than suggest, I will transform you into something that screams for eternity. Do we have an understanding? Silua bowed deeper. Perfectly clear, Emperor. We shall trouble you no further tonight. But know that Bane himself has sent envoys. They await your pleasure in the lower halls. After the Gentarum departed, Zedd sat alone on his throne, studying the tome. Waterdeep's layout, the masked lord's identities, magical ley lines, artifact locations. Useful indeed. But this mention of Bane troubled him, a god of tyranny who apparently took personal interest in immortal affairs. In Zedd's reality, such beings were abstract concepts, not active agents. Here, they walked among mortals, granted power, demanded worship. Send in Bane's envoys, he commanded the darkness. 3 figures entered, clerics in black plate armor, bearing the symbol of the Black Hand. Their leader spoke with absolute conviction. Lord Zedd, the Black Lord has witnessed your ambition and finds it adequate. He offers divine sponsorship. Kneel before Bane. Yo, accept his dominion and channel his power alongside your own. Become his chosen, and no force in Farron could stand against you. Zedd's response was immediate. The Z-staff flared, and reality itself seized the 3 clerics, lifting them into the air as their armor began to crush inward. I kneel to no one. Each word punctuated by increasing pressure. Your Black Lord wants to leash me like a pet. I am Lord Zedd, Emperor of the Cosmos. Tell your god that if he wishes my allegiance, he can kneel before me. He released them, letting them crash to the floor. Now leave, and inform Bane that his next envoys should come with offers of true partnership, not servitude. The clerics fled, rage and terror warring in their expressions. Outside, hidden on the ridge, the party had witnessed enough. We need to report this, Remy said urgently. The Gentarum are backing him. Bane is interested, and Zedd just declared himself independent of divine authority. This is going to explode. Then we move now, Torvin argued, before he grows stronger. A twig snapped behind them. The party whirled to find one of Zedd's monsters, a horror crafted from dead bandits and their weapons, standing 20 feet away. Its multiple mouths opened in unison, releasing a howl that echoed across the valley. Run! Silra shouted, loosing arrows as the creature charged. In his throne room, Zedd smiled at the alarm. So, the mice were watching. How delightful. Let's see if they're worth hunting. The monster's charge shook the ground as the party scattered. Torvin planted himself between the creature and his companions, shield raised, unholy light blazing from his hammer. The abomination, 6 bandit corpses fused with swords, axes, and a ballista, swung a blade arm that would have cleaved the dwarf in half. Would have, if Torvin hadn't been wearing Torm's blessing like armor. The sword shattered against divine radiance. The monster recoiled, confused, as Fenna unleashed a chromatic bolt of wild magic. The spell struck true, then did something completely unpredictable. It turned the creature's left side to soap bubbles that popped in rapid succession. "Not helpful!" Kess shouted, driving her daggers into what remained of the thing's leg joints. Black ichor sprayed, but the monster didn't bleed out. It couldn't bleed, having no true biology. It was animated refuse held together by Zedd's will. Cecilra's arrows found the creature's core, the central mass where Zedd's transmutation magic burned brightest. 3 shots, perfectly placed, and the abomination collapsed into its component parts. Dead flesh, broken steel, and the fading echo of dark sorcery. "Move!" Remy commanded, already sprinting toward the horses. That scream alerted the whole fortress. They mounted and rode hard, but behind them the gates opened again. 20 monsters poured forth in pursuit, an impossible menagerie of transmuted nightmares. Some ran on too many legs, others flew on wings of torn leather and bone. The fastest, a horror built from 3 wolves and a merchant's wagon, was gaining. Torvin wheeled his horse around. "Go! I'll hold them." "You'll die," Fenna protested. "Then I'll die buying you time to warn Waterdeep." The paladin dismounted, her hammer blazing with holy fire. "Torm, grant your servant strength!" The first monster reached him. Torvin's hammer struck like a meteor, pulverizing the wolf wagon hybrid into splinters and gore. The second fell to a shield bash that crumpled its skull face. But there were 18 more, and even a paladin had limits. Then the air split with a crack of displaced reality. Vajra Safar materialized in a flash of silver light, the black staff in her hands thrumming with arcane power. "Get back!" she commanded, and the staff unleashed a wave of force that scattered the monsters like leaves. "Teleportation circle, now!" She traced glowing runes in the air while Torvin held the perimeter. The monsters regrouped, shambling forward with mindless determination. Fenna added her magic to Vajra's, destabilizing the circle as Silra and Kess provided covering fire. "Done!" Vajra shouted. "Everyone through!" They dove into the portal as the monsters charged. Reality twisted, colors inverted, and suddenly they were standing in the Blackstaff Tower's teleportation chamber, gasping and bleeding but alive. Torvin collapsed to one knee, his armor dented, his hammer cracked. "Vajra, how did you know?" Scrying orb, the Blackstaff was already moving, gesturing for attendants to tend the wounded. "I've been watching since you engaged that first creature. Come, the masked lords are assembled. They need to hear everything." The council chamber was packed. Laeral Silverhand sat at the head of the table, flanked by representatives from the Lord's Alliance, the Harpers, and, surprisingly, a priest of Mystra in silver-blue robes. Maps of the Sword Coast covered every surface, with Dragonspear Castle marked in red. Remy delivered her report with military precision. Zedd's growing army, his accelerating mastery of the Weave, the Gentrim Alliance, and most disturbing, his rejection of Bane's offer. The priest of Mystra spoke first, his voice resonant with divine concern. "The Mother of Magic is deeply troubled. This Lord Zedd manipulates the Weave like clay, forcing it to obey principles from another reality. Each spell he casts creates scars in the fabric of magic itself. If he continues unchecked, he could permanently damage Farron's arcane foundation." "Can Mystra intervene directly?" Laeral asked. "She has sent warnings to her chosen, but the time of troubles taught the gods caution about direct intervention in mortal affairs. For now, she watches and prepares countermeasures." A Harper agent leaned forward. "What about the Gentrim angle? If Manchun is backing Zedd, Manchun is hedging bets," Vajra interrupted. "The Gentrim always do. They'll support Zedd until he becomes inconvenient, then they'll sell information about his weaknesses to whoever pays most. Standard operating procedure." "Then we use that." Laeral's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. We feed false intelligence to Gentrim contacts, make them think we're planning a direct assault on the fortress when we're actually respectfully, Open Lord, Torvin interrupted, still catching his breath. Any plan assumes we understand what we're fighting. We don't. His monsters are unkillable by conventional means. They're not alive, just matter forced into shape. His magic ignores our rules, and he's learning faster than we can adapt. Silence fell over the chamber. Then a new voice spoke from the doorway. Then perhaps you need someone who understands unconventional warfare. Everyone turned. The figure who entered wore the formal robes of Candlekeep's Avowed, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a career soldier. Older, gray-bearded, walking with a cane that hummed with subtle enchantment. Archivist Thorndar, Laryl acknowledged. What brings Candlekeep into this? Knowledge, as always. Thorndar approached the table, producing a slim volume bound in strange material. When the planar breach occurred, I began researching similar incidents. This tome describes an entity that conquered 17 worlds before being sealed away by a coalition of archmages. The descriptions match your Lord Zedd. Reality warping sorcery, monster creation, megalomaniacal ambition. He opened the book to a marked page showing an illustration. A skeletal figure wreathed in crimson energy, holding a staff topped with a Z-shaped crystal. Impossible, Vajra whispered. That's him, exactly. Not him, a predecessor. Or perhaps a parallel entity from another branch of the multiverse. Thorndar's expression was grim. The archmages who defeated this being documented its weakness, sustained disruption of its power source. The staff is the key. Separate Zedd from that staff, and his reality warping abilities diminish significantly. He becomes merely a powerful sorcerer rather than a dimensional threat. Merely powerful, Silra muttered. Wonderful. Laryl stood, decision crystallizing. We need a two-pronged approach. Vajra, can you develop a spell to sever the connection between Zedd and his staff? Given time and resources, possibly. But someone would need to get close enough to cast it. Very close, within the fortress itself. I'll go. The declaration came from an unexpected source. Fenna, the wild magic sorcerer. My magic is already unpredictable. Maybe that's an advantage against someone who's trying to control reality. He won't be able to predict what I'll do because I can't predict it either. Remy shook her head. Too dangerous. We need a full strike team. No, Thorndar interrupted. A full team would be detected. But a single infiltrator, especially one whose magic resonates chaotically with the weave, might slip through his defenses. It's insane. But insane might be our only option. The debate raged for hours, plans forming and dissolving as they confronted the reality of fighting an enemy who could reshape reality itself. Finally, Laryl called for a vote. The mission was approved. Fenna would infiltrate during a diversionary assault. Vajra would provide the severance spell. The Harpers would sabotage Gentrim supply lines to slow Zedd's expansion. And Torvin would lead a coalition force to contain the monster armies if they broke free before the operation succeeded. As the council dispersed, Remy found Fenna staring out a tower window toward distant Dragonspear. You don't have to do this, the Harper said quietly. Yes, I do. Fenna's draconic features were set with determination. Wild magic killed my family when I lost control as a child. Maybe it's time my curse became someone else's problem. Meanwhile, 90 miles south, Lord Zedd stood atop his palace, the Zed staff channeling energy from the weave in ever-increasing volumes. He'd spent the night studying the Gentrim tome and experimenting with his growing power. The results were spectacular. He'd learned to create more sophisticated monsters, creatures with actual combat tactics rather than mindless aggression. He'd discovered how to siphon ambient magic from the environment, accelerating his adaptation to the weave. And most importantly, he'd identified the ley line nexus beneath Dragonspear Castle, a convergence of magical energy that, properly harnessed, could amplify his power tenfold. Interesting, he mused. Watching his latest creation, a dragon-like construct built from an actual dragon skeleton he'd found in the ruins, take flight. This world provides such excellent raw materials, A Gentarim messenger appeared, bowing low. Lord Zedd, our scouts report increased activity around Waterdeep. The Lord's Alliance is mobilizing. Let them. By the time they arrive, I'll have an army that makes their precious heroes look like children playing soldier. He turned, the metallic faceplate gleaming in moonlight. But I wonder, are they foolish enough to attack directly, or clever enough to attempt subterfuge? He raised the Z-staff, and across the fortress, magical wards flared to life. Detection grids, barrier spells, trigger traps all keyed to his will. Not perfect. His understanding of defensive magic was still developing, but adequate. Mina, come then, heroes of Faerun, Zedd whispered to the Northern Lights. Show me what you're made of. Show me if this world breeds champions worthy of remembering, or just more raw material for my creations. In the Nine Hells, Glacia watched through a scrying portal and laughed with delight. In the Abyss, Grazist began drafting a very different offer than Bane's crude demand for servitude. And in Cyric's realm, the Mad God simply smiled, knowing that chaos loves nothing more than an overconfident tyrant making enemies he doesn't understand. The pieces were moving. The board was set. And somewhere in the weave itself, Mystra prepared contingencies that would shake the foundations of magic if this extraplanar emperor crossed one final line. War was inevitable. The only question was how many would die before it ended. 5 days after the council, Fenna stood in Vajra's laboratory trying not to vomit as the Blackstaff inscribed runes across her scales. Hold still, Vajra commanded, her quill glowing with silver light. These glyphs will cloak your magical signature and prevent scrying, theoretically. Theoretically? Fenna's tail lashed nervously. You're walking into the domain of someone who rewrites magical laws. I can't guarantee anything. Vajra stepped back, examining her work. The severance spell is encoded here. She tapped a rune on Fenna's left palm, and will activate when you touch his staff. You'll have maybe 3 seconds before he realizes what's happening. Use them wisely. 3 seconds to separate an emperor from his source of power while surrounded by his army. Simple. If you have a better plan, yeah, I'm listening. Fenna didn't. None of them did. Which was why she was about to teleport into a nightmare fortress with nothing but wild magic, desperate courage, and a spell that might explode in her face. Remy entered carrying a pack. Supplies. Healing potions, rope, lockpicks, emergency teleportation scroll, though if Zedd's wards are as strong as we think, it might just turn you into a frog instead of bringing you home. Comforting. Also this. Remy produced a small silver pendant shaped like a harp. Harper Emergency Beacon. If you're compromised, crush it. We'll extract you or die trying. Fenna clasped it around her neck, feeling the weight of what she was about to attempt. Outside the tower, the diversionary force was assembling. 200 soldiers from the Lord's Alliance, 50 Harpers, and 36 adventurers from the Yawning Portal, and Torvin Battlehammer leading the vanguard with grim determination. Their mission: assault Dragonspear's outer defenses, draw Zedd's attention, give Fenna her opening. Many wouldn't return. Everyone knew it. They went anyway. Mystra guide you, Vajra said quietly, placing a hand on Fenna's shoulder. And may your chaos confound his order. The teleportation circle flared. Fenna stepped through and vanished. She materialized in the forest half a mile from Zedd's fortress, immediately dropping prone as magical alarms screamed in her mind. The ward glyphs Vajra inscribed held barely. She felt the detection spells wash over her like cold water, seeking, probing, then sliding away as her chaotic magic signature scattered their focus. First obstacle cleared. Fenna crept toward the fortress through underbrush, watching the patrols. Zedd's monsters moved in patterns now, organized and tactical. A squad of blade-limbed horrors marched the perimeter while flying constructs circled overhead. Every 50 feet stood a sentry tower, not built, but transmuted from rocks and trees, guards fused with their posts into living watchtowers. She waited for the diversionary assault. It came at midnight. The northern approach erupted with light and sound as Torvin's force hit the main gates. Battle cries mixed with monster shrieks as steel met transmuted flesh. Magical artillery, Fireballs, lightning bolts, meteor swarms hammered Zedd's outer walls. The fortress shuddered but held, its alien architecture absorbing damage that should have shattered conventional stone. Fenna moved during the chaos, eyeing slipping through shadows toward a service entrance the Gentrim intelligence had marked. She found it guarded by two monsters, former horses fused with siege equipment. Their multiple eyes tracked the main battle, not expecting infiltration from this angle. She gathered her magic, feeling the familiar tingle of wild power. Here goes nothing. Fina released the spell intending a simple sleep charm. Instead, wild magic transformed it into something else entirely. A burst of prismatic color that turned both monsters into harmless rabbits that hopped away confused. "I'll take it," she muttered, slipping through the door before her luck changed. Inside, the fortress was worse than she'd imagined. The walls breathed, literally expanding and contracting like lungs, and the floor occasionally rippled as if reality couldn't decide what solid matter meant anymore. Corridors twisted at impossible angles, and through viewport windows she could see both the battle outside and glimpses of other dimensions bleeding through. Zedd's throne room lay at the center. She could feel it, a knot of concentrated power that made her scales itch. But between her and that room stood an entire palace of horrors. Fenna navigated carefully, using wild magic sparingly to avoid detection. A concealment spell that accidentally made her smell like fresh bread. A levitation charm that instead made her thoughts audible to nearby rats. Each misfire was terrifying, but the unpredictability kept Zedd's wards confused. She reached a great hall filled with Zedd's production floor, massive chambers where he conducted mass transmutations. Hundreds of monsters in various stages of creation lined the walls, some still screaming as their transformations completed. In the center, a Gentrim mage supervised the process, directing captured prisoners and salvaged materials toward transmutation circles. Fenna's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an army, it was an industry. She crept along the ceiling, a successful levitation spell finally, watching the operation. The Gentrim were providing more than intelligence. They were supplying raw materials, prisoners from rival organizations, defeated enemies, even their own expendable soldiers when quotas demanded it. "Lord Zedd requires 50 more by dawn," the supervising mage announced. "Oh, the assault on the gates is heavier than anticipated. We're losing constructs faster than—" He never finished. An explosion rocked the fortress as Torvin's forces breached the outer wall. Alarms shrieked. The Gentrim mage teleported away, and chaos consumed the production floor. Fenna dropped from the ceiling and ran. She found the throne room doors guarded by Zedd's elite constructs, massive 20-foot horrors built from actual adventurers who'd tried to stop him. Their armor fused with flesh, weapons growing from their bodies, eyes pleading for death they couldn't achieve. Behind those doors, she felt the Z-Staff's power like a physical pressure against her mind. "The diversionary assault is failing," a voice announced. Fenna froze, recognizing it as Zedd's but coming from everywhere at once. "So they thought volume would overwhelm me. Fools. I faced armies of Power Rangers. This rabble is nothing." Through the viewport windows, Fenna saw the horrible truth. Torvin's forces were being slaughtered. Zedd had unleashed his dragon construct, and it was tearing through ranks with elemental breath that melted armor and flesh alike. The paladin fought bravely, but even divine power had limits against this tide of manufactured death. She had to move now. Fenna gathered every scrap of wild magic she could channel and aimed at the throne room doors. "Maestra, if you're watching, now would be a great time for a miracle." She released the spell. Wild magic cascaded through the fortress like a tidal wave of pure chaos. The doors didn't just open. They transformed into a flock of butterflies that dispersed in all directions. And the elite guards turned into statues of salt that crumbled to dust. The walls became transparent, revealing the throne room and its occupant in all his terrible glory. Lord Zedd sat upon his throne, the Z-Staff across his lap, his metallic faceplate turned toward her. "Well, well," he said, rising. "A dragonborn sorcerer foolish enough to infiltrate my sanctum alone. I'm impressed by your courage and appalled by your stupidity." Fenna's hand burned where Vajra's severance rune waited. 3 seconds. She needed to touch the staff for 3 seconds. I've come to end your invasion, tyrant. Zedd laughed, the sound echoing through impossible dimensions. End? Child? I haven't even begun. This fortress is merely a beachhead. When I tap the ley line nexus beneath this ground, I'll have power enough to transmute entire cities. Waterdeep will become my greatest creation, a living monument to my conquest. You're insane. No, I'm inevitable. He raised the Z-staff, and reality itself bent toward him. But you've provided excellent entertainment. For that, I'll make your transformation quick. What shall you become? A throne guardian? A message to your allies? Or perhaps... Fenna didn't wait for him to finish. She unleashed wild magic directly at Zedd, not caring what form it took. The spell erupted as a beam of pure chaotic energy that struck the Emperor square in the chest. For one glorious moment, she thought it had worked. Then Zedd laughed again. Chaotic magic against someone who rewrites reality. The Z-staff blazed, and Fenna's spell was absorbed, analyzed, inverted. Thank you for the sample. I've been wondering how to incorporate chaos theory into my transmutations. You've just shown me the template. He gestured, and Fenna found herself frozen, levitating in the air as Zedd approached. The staff glowed inches from her face. Your death will fuel my next great work, Zedd announced. But first... The fortress shook violently. Zedd turned, irritation crossing his posture. Through the transparent walls, a new figure appeared on the battlefield. A massive earth elemental animated by druids from the Emerald Enclave, smashing through Zedd's forces. And riding atop it was Torvin, bloodied but unbowed, hammer blazing with holy fire. Zedd! The paladin's voice boomed across the battlefield. Face me, coward! Lord Zedd's attention divided for just a moment. Fenna didn't think. She channeled wild magic through her entire body, feeling it burn through her veins like liquid fire. The chaos was agonizing, uncontrollable, but it shattered Zedd's paralysis spell. She dropped, rolled, and lunged for the Z-staff. Her palm touched the crystal topper. The Severance rune activated, and the universe screamed. The Severance spell hit the Z-staff like a hammer striking crystal. For 3 eternal seconds, magical energies warred across dimensions. Vajra's carefully crafted disruption magic versus Zedd's reality-warping will filtered through a conduit that had conquered 1,000 worlds. Fenna felt her scales burning, her blood boiling, her very essence being rewritten by the forces coursing through her. The rune on her palm blazed white-hot as it tried to sever the connection between Emperor and artifact. Then Zedd roared with rage and backhanded her across the throne room. Fenna crashed through a viewport window, which shouldn't have been physically possible but was because this fortress made its own rules, and tumbled through air that tasted like copper and ozone. She hit the courtyard stones hard enough to crack ribs, gasping for breath. But the spell had done something. The Z-staff flickered. Just for a moment, its crimson glow dimmed, and across the battlefield, every monster Zedd had created stumbled as their animating force wavered. Zedd clutched the staff, his skeletal frame trembling with effort. Impossible! That spell! Who taught you that? Waterdeep sends its regards, Fenna spat blood, forcing herself upright. The Emperor descended from his throne room on a platform of solidified air, fury radiating from every movement. Alright, you've annoyed me, Dragonborn. For that, your transformation will be eternal. I'll make you the cornerstone of my palace, conscious, aware, screaming forever in stone. He raised the staff. Nothing happened. Zedd stared at the artifact in shock. The connection was damaged, not severed, but damaged enough that his finest control had slipped. He could still create monsters, still warp reality, but the precision he'd spent weeks developing was gone. What have you done? He screamed. Torvin's earth elemental crashed through the fortress gates at that exact moment, the paladin leaping free with hammer raised. Divine justice, monster! Torm! Holy radiance exploded outward as Torvin struck the ground. Every undead, every corrupted construct within 50 feet disintegrated. Zedd's monsters closest to the blast simply ceased existing, yet their transmuted forms unable to withstand pure divine power. Zedd snarled and gestured. Reality twisted, and a wave of force hurled Torvin backward into his own troops. But it was sloppy, uncontrolled, the kind of blunt force magic any archmage could produce, not the surgical reality editing he'd demonstrated before. The staff was failing him. "Retreat," Zedd commanded his forces. "Fall back to secondary positions. Protect the leyline nexus." But his monsters, operating on damaged animation protocols, responded slowly. The Allied forces pressed their advantage, pushing deeper into the fortress. Fireballs and lightning bolts hammered the alien architecture, and this time it cracked, bled, showed weakness. Fenna struggled toward the Harper beacon, knowing her mission was complete. Touch the staff, disrupt his power. I survived to tell Vajra it worked. Except she couldn't move. Her ribs were definitely broken, possibly punctured a lung, and her legs wouldn't respond. Then hands grabbed her shoulders. Kess, the rogue, her face grim with determination. "Got you. Remy's bringing the extraction circle." "The staff," Fenna gasped. "Damaged, not destroyed. You did your part." Kess hauled her toward where Remy was frantically drawing teleportation runes with a glowing chalk. "Let the big damn heroes finish it." But finishing it proved complicated. Zedd had retreated to the fortress's lowest level, the leyline nexus chamber where Farron's magical currents converged. Even with his staff damaged, he could draw power directly from that convergence. When Torvin and a strike team breached the chamber, they found the Emperor standing in a circle of blazing energy, the Z-staff planted like a lightning rod, channeling raw arcane force. "You think you've won?" Zedd's voice echoed with renewed power. "This nexus contains more magical energy than your entire city. I don't need perfect control, I just need power." He released a shockwave that sent the entire strike team flying. Stone walls liquefied. The ceiling became a swarm of bats. Gravity inverted randomly. Zedd was burning through the ley line's energy recklessly, wastefully, but with such overwhelming force that precision didn't matter. "Bring the whole fortress down on him," Torvin ordered. "Bury this abomination." The Allied forces began a controlled demolition, but Zedd simply transmuted the falling debris into more monsters mid-flight. Rubble became gargoyles. Shattered walls became serpents of stone. Every attack fed his army. Then, a new player entered the field. Reality tore open with the distinctive crack of a divine manifestation. Everyone, Allied forces, Zedd's monsters, even the Emperor himself, froze as the presence filled the chamber. Maestra's avatar stepped through. A woman of impossible beauty wrapped in robes of living starlight, eyes containing the sum of all magical knowledge. She looked at Zedd with an expression of profound disappointment. "Enough," the goddess of magic said quietly. The single word carried weight that made reality itself comply. The ley line energy stopped flowing to Zedd. Just stopped, as if someone had turned off a tap. The Z-staff sputtered and dimmed further. "You dare interfere?" Zedd demanded. "I am Lord Zedd. I've conquered dimensions. What are you but another pretender claiming godhood?" Maestra's laugh was like silver bells. "Child, I am magic in this reality. Every spell you've cast, every transmutation you've forced, every time you've bent the weave to your alien will, I've permitted it. I wanted to see what you do with power in a world not your own. And you failed the test." Her expression hardened. "You took the gift of magic and used it only for conquest. You saw living beings as raw materials. You wounded the weave itself through reckless, selfish manipulation. You are unworthy of the power you wield." She gestured, and the Z-staff cracked. Not completely. Not yet. But a hairline fracture appeared in the crystal, glowing with leaking energy. Zedd stumbled, feeling his connection to the artifact weaken further. "No! No! This staff has served me across countless realities. You cannot... I can do anything I wish with magic in my domain." Maestra's voice carried absolute authority. "I am giving you one chance, Emperor. Leave Farron. Return to your own dimension. Never return. Do this, and I'll repair the damage you've done to the weave. Refuse, and I'll shatter that staff completely, strip you of all magical ability, and leave you mortal and powerless in a world that wants you dead." The chamber fell silent. Torvin and his forces waited, weapons ready. Zedd stood trembling with rage and fear, the Z-staff flickering in his grip. For the first time since arriving in Farron, Lord Zedd felt genuinely uncertain. In his home reality, gods were distant concepts. Here, they were active agents who could simply decide you didn't get to use magic anymore. His entire power base rested on that staff, on transmutation magic, on reality warping. Without them, he was just a skeletal monster with delusions of grandeur. But accepting exile meant admitting defeat, meant returning to his dimension in disgrace, possibly to face the Power Rangers again, certainly to endure mockery from every enemy he'd ever made. Pride warred with survival instinct. "Your answer?" Maestra prompted. Then, from the shadows of the chamber, a new voice spoke. "Perhaps the Emperor requires additional perspective." Everyone turned as a figure emerged from literal nothingness. A tall, gray-skinned humanoid with 6 fingers on each hand, wearing robes of liquid shadow that seemed to drink in light. His beauty was terrible and perfect, his smile promising both pleasure and damnation. "Grazist," Mistra said coldly, "this doesn't concern the Abyss." "Doesn't it?" The demon lord of seduction gestured casually. Lord Zedd's planar breach weakened the boundaries between realities. "I simply widened the crack. And I bring an offer our skeletal friend might find more appealing than exile." He turned to Zedd, ignoring the weapons pointed at him. "You seek conquest, power, recognition as the supreme being. I offer you all 3. Become my general. Lead my demonic armies. I'll grant you territories across the Abyss to rule as you see fit. Your transmutation magic would be invaluable in shaping new layers of torment. And Mistra's authority ends at the planar boundaries." "You're offering him hell," Torvin said flatly. "The Abyss, technically. Different management structure." Grazizit's smile widened. "What say you, Emperor? I exile to your home dimension as a failure? Mortality in a hostile world? Or eternity as a demon lord with actual divine backing?" Zedd looked between Maestra's stern judgment and Grazizit's seductive offer. The Z-staff pulsed weakly in his grip, damaged but not destroyed. His monster army was decimated but not eliminated. His fortress was crumbling, but the Nexus chamber remained intact. 3 choices, 3 possible futures. And somewhere in the weave itself, Maestra prepared to act if he chose poorly. The goddess had offered mercy once. She would not offer twice. "Decide," she commanded. "Now." Lord Zedd closed his eyes, his alien mind calculating probabilities, weighing outcomes, analyzing every angle. Then his eyes opened, and his decision would reshape everything to come. "I choose," he began, raising the Z-staff one final time. "You're none of your options." The staff blazed with reckless abandon as Zedd poured every scrap of remaining power into one desperate gambit. The leyline nexus exploded outward, reality itself fragmenting as he tore open a dimensional rift. Not to his home reality, not to the Abyss, but to somewhere else entirely. "If I cannot have this world, then no one will." The rift expanded, pulling everything toward it. Monsters, soldiers, chunks of the fortress, even the magical energy of the Nexus itself. It was consuming Dragonspear Castle and threatening to spread. Maestra moved immediately, weaving counterspells to contain the breach. Grazist laughed and vanished, his offer rejected but chaos achieved. And Torvin, seeing the dimensional tear threatening to swallow everything, made his own choice. The paladin sprinted toward Zedd, this hammer blazing with Torm's full divine power. "For Waterdeep! For Farron! For the innocent you've murdered!" He struck the Z-staff with everything he had. Divine radiance met reality-warping power. The staff shattered, and the explosion erased Dragonspear Castle from existence. The shockwave reached Waterdeep 90 miles away. Citizens stumbled as the ground trembled. Windows shattered. In the Blackstaff Tower, Vajra's scrying orb exploded in a shower of crystalline fragments, and she knew that something fundamental had broken in the weave. At Ground Zero, there was only light. When it faded, Dragonspear Castle was gone. Not destroyed, gone, erased. In its place lay a perfectly circular crater half a mile wide, the edges smooth as glass. At the center, a swirling vortex of unstable dimensional energy marked where Zedd's rift had been forcibly collapsed by the staff's destruction. Survivors lay scattered across the blast radius. Allied forces who'd been outside the immediate detonation zone were healing their wounded, counting their dead, staring in shock at the absence where a fortress had stood. Torvin Battlehammer knelt at the crater's edge, his armor scorched black. His hammer cracked down the center, barely conscious. Remy reached him first, pressing a healing potion to his lips. Did we? The paladin couldn't finish. The fortress is gone, Remy confirmed, scanning the crater. Zedd's army collapsed when the staff shattered. But Torvin, we need to… Where is he? The roar came from Laryl Silverhand, nay arriving via teleportation circle with Vajra and a contingent of battle mages. The Open Lord's face was pale with fury and fear. Where is Lord Zedd? Tell me we didn't just glass half the countryside only for him to escape. Vajra was already casting detection spells, her hands weaving through complex patterns. I'm not detecting his magical signature. The dimensional rift destabilized when the staff broke. He may have been pulled through, scattered across the plains, or vaporized, Laryl pressed. I can't confirm destruction. The magical chaos is too intense. Vajra's expression darkened. But I can tell you that rift is still active. Weakened, contained by Mystra's intervention, but active. It's leaking planar energy into our reality. As if to punctuate her words, something crawled from the crater. And it had been one of Zedd's monsters, a horror built from horses and farming equipment. But exposure to the dimensional rift had transformed it further. Now it flickered between states of existence. Solid, translucent, composed of shadow, burning with elemental fire, all at once. It shambled forward with no animating intelligence, just residual magic-seeking form. Silra put 3 arrows through it. The creature dispersed into mist, reformed, dispersed again, caught in a loop of dying and unmaking. Mystra's mercy, the ranger whispered. What has he done to this place? A voice answered from the air itself. Mystra's avatar manifesting just long enough to deliver her judgment. Lord Zedd's reckless final act has wounded the barrier between planes. This crater is now a thin point in reality. Creatures from other dimensions may slip through. Magic will behave unpredictably here, and the weave itself bears scars that will take decades to heal. Can you seal it? Laryl demanded. Given time, yes, but not instantly. For now, this site must be quarantined. No one approaches the crater without my clergy's supervision. The energies here are too dangerous for mortal interaction. The avatar faded, leaving behind only silver light and the weight of new responsibilities. Torvin struggled to stand, leaning on his broken hammer. What about Fenna? And Kess? The extraction team? Here. Kess emerged from behind a pile of rubble, supporting Fenna. The dragonborn sorcerer looked worse than death. Scales burned, one arm hanging useless, blood seeping from a dozen wounds. But alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. The severance spell, Fenna gasped as healers rushed to her. Worked. I'm better than expected. Weakened him enough that Torvin's strike could finish it. You saved us all, Laryl said quietly, kneeling beside the wounded sorcerer. Waterdeep owes you a debt beyond measure. Just pay my bar tab at the yawning portal. Fenna managed a pained smile before losing consciousness. The battlefield triage continued for hours. 147 Allied soldiers dead, 300 wounded, 63 missing, presumed pulled into the dimensional rift. The Emerald Enclave's druids had lost their earth elemental. 5 Harper agents would never report home. And countless adventurers who'd answered the call for heroes now rested in mass graves, hastily dug in the blasted earth. But Waterdeep stood. The Sword Coast was safe. And Lord Zedd's invasion had been stopped. Or had it? 3 days later, in the yawning portal, the survivors gathered to compare notes and process trauma. Torvin sat quietly, his new hammer, a gift from the Church of Torm, resting against the table. Silra nursed an ale, her ranger's eyes distant. Kess counted coins from the reward Waterdeep had issued, already planning her next expenditure. And Fenna, bandaged and scarred but healing, stared into her wine. "We won," Remy said, but it sounded like a question. "Did we?" Fenna gestured to the broadsheets covering the table, reports from across Farron. "Look at this. The crater at Dragonspear is spawning aberrations nightly. A village near Baldur's Gate reported objects spontaneously transforming, just like Zedd's magic. 3 people in Neverwinter have developed strange abilities after touching debris from the battle. And the Gentarim are in chaos because half their leadership was at Dragonspear when it exploded." "The Gentarim in chaos is hardly a loss," Kess muttered. "It is when their power vacuum creates opportunity for worse actors." Remy unfolded a message scroll marked with Harper seals. "Our intelligence suggests Grazist's appearance wasn't random. The Demon Lord has been testing the planar boundaries, looking for weak points. Zedd's rift gave him exactly that." Silra set down her drink. "So we traded one invasion for a potential demonic incursion." "Maybe." Torvin's voice was heavy. "Or maybe we bought time. Zedd was here, active, building his army. Demons are theoretical threats until they cross over. We can prepare for them. We couldn't prepare for an emperor who learned faster than we could adapt." The table fell silent, each warrior wrestling with the question of whether their victory had been worth its cost. Then Durnan, the tavern's owner, approached with a sealed letter. "Message for you, Remy," came through official Harper channels, marked urgent. Remy broke the seal and read, her expression darkening with each line. Finally, she looked up at her companions. "Candlekeep's researchers have been analyzing Zedd's magic. Thorndar says the transmutation principles he demonstrated are reproducible. Not easily and not safely, but theoretically possible for sufficiently skilled wizards to replicate. The archivist is requesting we secure all physical evidence from the battle site before it falls into the wrong hands." "Knowledge of how to turn people into monsters," Fenna said flatly. "Wonderful. Just what Faerun needs. There's more." Remy's finger traced another paragraph. "They found something in the crater. An artifact. Not the Z-Staff, that was definitely destroyed. But something Zedd was working on, a prototype that survived the blast. Maester's priests have it in containment, but it's resonating with the dimensional energies, growing stronger." Kess leaned forward. "What kind of artifact?" "They don't know yet, but it pulses with the same reality-warping signature as Zedd's magic. And it's calling to people, whispering promises of power. 3 researchers have already tried to steal it." The implications settled over the table like a shroud. "So Zedd's gone," Silra said slowly. "But his legacy remains. His magic, his techniques, his artifacts. Even in defeat, he's changing our world." Torvin stood, gripping his new hammer. "Then we deal with it. We destroyed him once. We can destroy what he left behind. It's what heroes do." "Is it, though?" Fenna's question stopped them all. "Think about it. We fought Zedd because he was transforming people into monsters, conquering through force, treating life as raw material. But what are we doing differently? We killed hundreds. We unleashed divine power that scarred the land. We made alliances with organizations we know are corrupt because we needed their information. Where's the line between heroism and necessary evil?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because there was no good answer. Remy finally spoke. "The line is what we do next. Zedd would have used his victory to conquer more, to escalate, to take everything. We use ours to protect, to heal, to prevent the next tyrant. That's the difference." "Is it enough?" Fenna pressed. "It has to be," Torvin said quietly, "because it's all we have." Meanwhile, in a dimension between dimensions, where reality dissolved into probability and chaos reigned supreme, something stirred. Lord Zedd had not been vaporized. He had not been scattered. When the Z-Staff shattered and the dimensional rift collapsed, he'd been pulled through, along with fragments of his power, scraps of his consciousness, and an undying rage that transcended physical form. He drifted in the space between worlds, neither alive nor dead, watching through the cracks in reality as Farron celebrated his defeat. His body was gone, dissolved by planar energies. His staff was destroyed, its power dispersed across dimensions. But his will remained. And in the spaces where dimensions touched, where the weave was thin, where Mystra's authority weakened, he began to gather himself. It would take time, years, perhaps decades. He would need to rebuild from nothing, relearn his magic in this wounded state, find new sources of power in the cosmic debris that floated between planes. But Lord Zedd was eternal, patient, and absolutely convinced of his inevitable victory. "Rangers," he whispered to the void, his voice a ghost of what it had been. "Heroes, gods, you've merely delayed the inevitable. I am conquest incarnate. I am ambition made manifest, and I will return." In the abyss, Grazist heard that whisper and smiled. In the Nine Hells, Glacia made note of a potential future asset. And in Cyric's realm, the mad god laughed, already weaving plots around the exiled emperor's eventual return. While the multiverse had not seen the last of Lord Zedd. Back in Waterdeep, unaware of the cosmic scheming, Vajra stood atop the Blackstaff Tower, gazing toward distant Dragonspear. The crater glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsing with unstable energies that would take years to fully contain. "We won this time," she murmured to the night. "But at what cost? And what happens when the next threat arrives? When the next tyrant from another reality crashes into our world with powers we don't understand?" No answer came. There never was for questions like that. Below, Waterdeep slept uneasily, saved but scarred, victorious but uncertain. And in taverns across the Sword Coast, adventurers raised their glasses to fallen comrades while wondering when the next call to heroism would come. The age of extraplanar invasions had begun, and Lord Zedd had been the first, but he would not be the last. And Farron would need to adapt or perish. 6 weeks after the Battle of Dragonspear, Fenna descended into Undermountain. The decision hadn't been easy. Her body had healed, mostly. But the psychological scars ran deeper. She'd touched the Z-Staff, felt its reality-warping power course through her veins, experienced what it meant to reshape existence through will alone. Part of her craved that sensation again. Part of her feared what that craving meant. So she'd volunteered for the most dangerous mission available. Retrieve Zedd's prototype artifact from the depths of Hallister's domain, where Mystra's priests had hidden it after 3 more researchers attempted theft. "You don't have to do this," Remy had said during the briefing. "Your part is done. Rest. Eat, recover." "Can't," Fenna had replied. "Not until I know that thing is destroyed. I felt what Zedd's magic does to people. That artifact is a cancer waiting to metastasize." Now she stood at the entrance to the Mad Mage's dungeon, accompanied by an unlikely team. A priest of Mystra named Kelson Darktreader, whose stern devotion to magical purity bordered on fanaticism. A Gentarum mage named Cyrana, who'd defected after witnessing Zedd's atrocities. And, surprisingly, a construct, one of Zedd's creations that had retained consciousness after the staff's destruction. The construct called itself Fragment. It had been 3 people once: a Harper agent, a Waterdavian guard, and a merchant's daughter. Zedd had fused them during his experiments, and the staff's destruction had left them partially separated but unable to fully untangle. 3 minds sharing one transmuted body, driven by a desperate need to prevent others suffering their fate. "The artifact is 7 levels down," Kelson announced, consulting a magical map. Mystra's priests placed it in a chamber warded against scrying, teleportation, and divination. "We'll have to fight our way through." "Hallister's monsters or Zedd's leftovers?" Cyrana asked nervously. "Both. The dimensional instability from the rift has drawn things into Undermountain. Creatures that exist between states of reality, and some of Zedd's prototype creations apparently wandered down here before we could contain them." Fragment spoke with 3 voices in discordant harmony. "Then let's move. Every moment that artifact exists is a moment it corrupts more minds." They descended into darkness. Undermountain was legendarily deadly under normal circumstances. A labyrinth of traps, monsters, and magical anomalies created by the mad mage Hallister for his twisted amusement. But the dimensional instability had made it worse. Corridors phased between solid and transparent. Gravity reversed randomly. and the creatures they encountered were nightmares. On the second level, they found a Zedd prototype, a half-finished monster that should have needed the staff to animate, yet somehow moved anyway. It had been a group of kobolds fused with mining equipment, but weeks of exposure to Undermountain's chaos had warped it further. It existed in 3 states simultaneously: dead, alive, and something in between. Fenna's wild magic struck it, transforming the creature into a shower of butterflies that immediately died, reanimated as skeletal butterflies, then burst into flames that burned cold. "The weave is sick here," Kelson observed grimly. "Maestra's healing touch can't reach this deep. We're operating on corrupted magic." They pressed on, fighting through aberrations drawn by the dimensional wounds, avoiding traps that reset themselves randomly, and navigating chambers where the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. On the 4th level, they encountered something worse: other treasure hunters. A red wizard of Thay emerged from the shadows, flanked by 2 zombie bodyguards. His scarred face twisted with ambition as he recognized Fenna. "The Dragonborn who touched the staff. Perfect. You'll guide us to the artifact." "Not interested," Fenna said flatly, magic crackling around her claws. "I wasn't asking." The red wizard gestured. A necromantic energy lashed out. The fight was brutal. Red wizards didn't become red wizards by being weak, and this one specialized in domination magic. He seized control of Fragment, turning the construct against its allies. Serana countered with Gentarim battle magic: vicious, efficient, lethal. Kelson channeled Maestra's power to dispel the domination, but the effort left him drained. Fenna ended it with wild magic that turned the red wizard's zombies into harmless pillows, then struck the wizard himself with a chaos bolt that aged him 40 years in 3 seconds. He fled, teleporting away with a curse. "There will be others," Serana said, healing a gash on her arm. "The Thayans, the Gentarim loyalists, the Netherese remnants. Everyone knows about the artifact. We're in a race." Fragment's 3 voices spoke urgently. "Then we run!" They descended faster, taking risks with unstable passages and suspicious shortcuts. On the 5th level, they found evidence of Hallister's attention, a message scrawled in glowing runes that rearranged themselves as they watched. "An emperor's broken toy. How delicious. Shall I keep it? Shall I study it? Shall I let you take it? Decisions, decisions." "The Mad Mage is toying with us," Kelson said. "He could stop us anytime he wishes." "Or he wants to see what we do," Fenna suggested. "Hallister loves experiments. We're probably entertainment." The 6th level was a nightmare of living architecture. Walls breathed. Floors digested anything that touched them. Ceilings dripped acid that burned through stone. And in the center, they found another of Zedd's prototypes, this one far more sophisticated. It had been a team of adventurers once. Now it was a fusion of flesh, steel, and something else, dimensional energy woven into its very structure. The creature recognized them, or at least recognized Fragment as kindred, and spoke with a voice like breaking glass. "Kill us, please." Fragment approached slowly, 3 voices filled with compassion. "We're trying to destroy the thing that made you. If we succeed, won't help us. Already. Changed. Becoming something else." The prototype was mutating, evolving beyond Zedd's original design. Exposure to Undermountain's chaos and the dimensional instability was transforming it into something new, a hybrid of transmutation magic and planar energy that could potentially reproduce, spread, infect others. Fenna understood immediately. This is what the artifact will do. Not just create monsters, but create a new category of being. Self-replicating transmutation. A plague of transformation. Kelson raised his holy symbol. "Maestra, forgive me." Divine light filled the chamber, and the prototype screamed as it was unmade, dissolved back into component parts that could finally rest. Fragment wept with 3 voices. They found the artifact chamber on the 7th level, hidden behind wards that made Fenna's scales ache just approaching. Kelson worked for an hour dispelling the protections while Serana and Fragment guarded the entrance. Finally, the door opened. The chamber beyond was small, circular, carved from a single piece of black crystal. And in the center, suspended in a field of crackling energy, floated Zedd's prototype. And it was beautiful in a terrible way. A sphere of interlocking metal and crystal, pulsing with crimson light, inscribed with equations and symbols from a reality that wasn't this one. Just looking at it made Fenna's wild magic surge uncontrollably. Her scales flickered between colors. Her breath came out as frost, then fire, then shadowy mist. And she could hear it. Power, the artifact whispered directly into her mind. Unlimited potential, reshape reality, become more than mortal, transcend flesh, touch infinity. Fenna, Kelson's voice seemed distant. We need to contain it, and Fenna, what are you doing? She was walking toward it. She didn't remember deciding to walk, but her feet moved anyway. The artifact's whispers grew louder, more seductive. You tasted this power when you touched the staff. You want it again. I can give it to you. No masters, no limits, no gods telling you what magic should be. Just pure creation, pure will, pure power. Fenna, stop! Serana grabbed her arm. The dragonborn sorcerer turned, and her eyes glowed with crimson light. Let go! Fragment, help me! Serana struggled to hold Fenna back. The construct lunged forward with three voices, screaming denial, wrapping transmuted limbs around Fenna's waist. But the sorcerer's wild magic exploded outward, hurling both Fragment and Serana against the walls. Fenna reached for the artifact. Kelson acted on pure instinct. He channeled every scrap of divine power Mistra had granted him, weaving a spell of magical severance identical to what Vajra had used on the Z-Staff. But this time, he targeted Fenna herself, cutting her connection to the weave entirely. The Dragonborn collapsed, gasping, as her magic simply stopped. What did you... She stared at her claws, feeling the absence where wild magic had always churned. I can't feel the weave. I can't feel anything. Temporary, Kelson panted, sweat pouring down his face. 20 minutes, maybe less. But enough time for us to destroy that abomination before it destroys you. He approached the artifact, preparing a spell of unmaking. The sphere pulsed once, violently, and every ward in the chamber activated simultaneously. Lightning, fire, force, necrotic energy, a dozen different magical attacks designed to kill anyone attempting to tamper with the artifact. Kelson's divine shields held for 3 seconds. Then they shattered, and the priest of Mistra fell, his body charred and broken. No! Sirana rushed to him. But she could see it was too late. The old priest managed one final smile. Destroy it, he whispered, before Zedd's ghost wins. He died. Fragment stood, 3 voices speaking in terrible harmony. We know what to do. The construct approached the artifact, transmuted flesh reaching toward the sphere of power that had created it. Fragment, don't! Fenna screamed, her magic slowly returning. Contact will kill you. We're already dead, the 3 voices replied. We died when Zedd transmuted us. This body is just an echo refusing to fade. But maybe we can take this thing with us when we go. Fragment touched the artifact. For one moment, nothing happened. Then the construct began to absorb the sphere, pulling its power inward. The artifact fought back, trying to transmute Fragment further, to corrupt and control. But 3 souls working in perfect synchronization proved stronger than one broken prototype. The chamber filled with blinding light as construct and artifact merged, fused, became something neither device nor being. Fragment's body expanded, shifted, began tearing itself apart at the molecular level. Run, the 3 voices commanded in unison. Get out! We'll detonate in 30 seconds. Serana grabbed Fenna and activated an emergency teleportation scroll. Harper issued, keyed to the yawning portal. Reality twisted, and they vanished just as Fragment reached critical mass. The explosion was contained by Undermountain's ancient wards, but it was enough. The artifact was destroyed, its power dispersed across dimensions too fractured to ever reassemble. And Fragment, 3 souls who'd suffered in fusion, finally found peace in annihilation. Fenna and Sirana materialized in the yawning portal's common room, collapsing onto the floor. Durnan rushed over with healing potions while patrons stared. Kelson? Durnan asked quietly. Fenna shook her head. The tavern fell silent in respect for the fallen priest. Another hero dead in the war against Zedd's legacy. But the artifact was destroyed. The corruption ended before it could spread. Small victories, paid for in blood. 2 months after Undermountain, the consequences of Zedd's invasion rippled across Faerun, like cracks spreading through ice. In Baldur's Gate, a merchant discovered he could transmute copper into gold with a touch. For exactly 3 seconds before the gold reverted, and his hand aged 10 years. In Neverwinter, a child's nightmare literally manifested as a monster that had to be put down by the city guard. And at the Dragonspear crater, despite Maestra's priests maintaining constant vigil, something was growing. Vajra Safar studied reports in her tower, dark circles under her eyes from weeks of sleepless research. Around her floated dozens of documents, each describing a new manifestation of what scholars were calling Zedd's curse, the lingering corruption in the weave caused by his reality-warping magic. "It's metastasizing," she told the emergency council assembled in her chamber. Laeral, Remy, Torvin, and representatives from every major faction listened grimly. Every use of transmutation magic anywhere on the Sword Coast carries a risk of wild mutation. Mages are afraid to cast polymorph spells. Druids report their wild shape abilities are unpredictable. And the crater itself. She gestured to a scrying projection showing Dragonspear. The crater was no longer empty. Something crystalline was growing from its center, a structure that pulsed with the same crimson energy that had characterized Zedd's magic. "What is it?" Laeral demanded. "A scar in reality attempting to heal itself," Vajra explained. "Or a doorway trying to open. Maestra's clergy can't determine which. But it's growing larger every day, and it's resonating with the dimensional frequencies Zedd used. If it completes..." "Another invasion," Torvin finished, his new hammer clenched tight. "From where? His home dimension?" "Worse, from everywhere." Vajra's expression was haunted. Zedd's final act didn't just tear a hole between our world and his. It damaged the fundamental boundaries between all dimensions. That crystal formation is a wound in the multiverse, and every reality is bleeding through it. Remy stood abruptly. "Then we destroy it. Assemble strike teams, bring siege weapons, glass the entire region if we have to." "We tried," a new voice interrupted. A priest of Maestra entered, robes scorched, face ashen. "3 days ago, Archmage Zara Chadran led a team of battle mages to disintegrate the crystal. The spells bounced back, killed 2 mages instantly. The crystal absorbed the energy and grew faster." "Absorbed magical attacks?" Torvin's tactical mind raced. "What about mundane force? Siege engines, explosives, physical demolition?" The priest shook his head. "The crystal exists partially out of phase with our reality. Physical objects pass through it without effect. It's only solid to magical energy, not which it converts into more growth." "Then we starve it," Laeral suggested. "Establish a dead magic zone around the crater. Prevent it from feeding on ambient arcane energy." Vajra was already shaking her head. To create a dead zone that size would require rituals that might damage the weave even worse than Zedd did. "We'd be amputating a limb to save the body. Maestra explicitly forbids it." The council fell into frustrated silence. An enemy they couldn't fight, couldn't destroy, couldn't even properly understand. Then Cyrana spoke from the corner where she'd been observing. The former Gentarim mage had been granted provisional sanctuary in Waterdeep after her actions in Undermountain, but she remained under constant Harper surveillance. "There might be another way," she said quietly. "So, the Gentarim archives contain research on planar mechanics. When Manchun was attempting to become a lich, he studied dimensional anchors extensively. If someone could reach the other side of that crystal, enter the space between dimensions where Zedd was pulled, they might be able to seal the wound from within." "That's suicide," Remy said flatly. "The space between dimensions tears apart anything with physical form. Even constructs dissolve there. Not if you're already partially transmuted." All eyes turned to Cyrana. Fragment proved that Zedd's victims could interact with dimensional energy without immediately dissolving. The transmutation magic created a compatibility. Someone who's been touched by Zedd's power might be able to survive long enough to seal the breach. Fenna realized where this was going before anyone else. No, absolutely not. You touched the Z-Staff, Sirana pressed. You channeled its power through your body. You survived when you shouldn't have. There's still residual transmutation energy in your magical signature. I can sense it. You're the only person in Faerun who might be able to cross the barrier. And do what? I'm a sorcerer, not a planar mechanic. Vajra spoke carefully. If Sirana is right about the dimensional compatibility, I could teach you a sealing ritual. Something designed to close planar breaches from the inside. But Fenna, you need to understand, once you cross that barrier, you'd be cutting yourself off from our reality. The ritual would seal you on the other side, permanently. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Fenna stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. You're asking me to commit suicide. To throw myself into the space between dimensions and die alone just to fix Zedd's mess. I'm asking you to be a hero, Laryl said gently. The kind the bards sing about. The kind who makes the impossible choice because no one else can. Find someone else. There is no one else. Torvin's voice was quiet but firm. Every person Zedd transmuted is either dead, dissolved, or too damaged to cast complex magic. Fragment is gone. The Red Wizards would use the opportunity for their own schemes. You're the only one with the magical ability, the dimensional compatibility, and the moral character we can trust. Fenna looked around the room at faces filled with sympathy, desperation, and unspoken pleading. She thought of Fragment's sacrifice in Undermountain, of Kelson dying to save her from the artifact's corruption, or of the 147 soldiers who'd fallen at Dragonspear fighting an enemy they didn't understand. I need time to think, she finally said. You have 3 days, Vajra replied. After that, the crystal will reach critical mass and the barrier will rupture on its own. Then we'll have full planar collapse. Every dimension bleeding into ours simultaneously. The Nine Hells, the Abyss, the Far Realm, all of them. Faerun will become a battlefield for cosmic forces that make Lord Zedd look like a minor nuisance. Fenna left the tower without another word. She spent the next 2 days wandering Waterdeep, trying to reconcile herself with what was being asked. She visited the yawning portal, where Durnan poured her drinks and didn't ask questions. She walked the walls, looking out over a city of 1 million souls who had no idea their existence hung by a thread. She prayed to gods she'd never really believed in, hoping for a sign that never came. On the evening of the second day, she found herself at the plinth, Waterdeep's memorial to fallen heroes. New names had been carved recently. Kelson Darktreader, Fragment, with 3 names listed beneath, and dozens of soldiers from Dragonspear. A figure approached, Remy, carrying 2 bottles of wine. Thought you might want company, the Harper said, sitting beside her. They drank in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. I don't want to die, Fenna finally said. I'm 28 years old. I've barely lived. There are places I haven't seen, spells I haven't learned, experiences I haven't had. It's not fair that I'm the one who has to make this sacrifice. No, Remy agreed. It's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Zedd invaded a world that wasn't his, killed people who'd never wronged him. And even in defeat, he's still destroying lives. You didn't ask for this burden. You don't deserve it. And if you choose to walk away, no one here would blame you. But you'll blame yourself. Remy's voice was soft. Every time you hear about someone transformed by the lingering corruption, every time a child's nightmare becomes real and kills their family, every time a mage's spell goes wrong and creates another monster, you'll know you could have stopped it. And that knowledge will eat you alive worse than any dimensional energy ever could. Fenna laughed bitterly. So I die now, or I die slowly inside. A wonderful choice. There is a third option. Remy pulled out a small crystal vial containing swirling silver liquid. This is a fragment of pure weave energy, harvested from the astral plane. Maestra's priests use it for the most dangerous rituals. If you drink it before crossing the dimensional barrier, it would stabilize me? Let me survive? No. It would make your sacrifice mean something more. Remy's eyes were wet. The ritual Vajra is teaching you doesn't just seal the breach. It transforms the sealer into a permanent anchor point, a living ward that prevents that specific dimensional wound from ever reopening. You become part of the barrier itself. Not dead, not exactly alive, but existing, watching over that wound for eternity, ensuring nothing crosses through. A guardian, Fenna whispered. A hero, Remy corrected. Or the kind that never gets to come home but saves everyone else's home forever. Fenna stared at the vial, understanding crystallizing. This wasn't death. It was transformation into something else. Something that would endure long after her physical form dissolved. A legacy that actually mattered. If I do this, she said slowly, I want something in return. Name it. A statue. Here, on the plinth. With an inscription that tells the truth. Not some sanitized hero worship, but the real story. That I was terrified, that I didn't want to do this, that I chose it anyway because someone had to. Done. Fenna took the vial, studying the liquid that represented her last moments of choice. Then she tucked it carefully into her pouch and stood. All right, she said to the twilight sky. Hoxa, let's learn how to save the world. Vajra taught her the ritual over the next 12 hours. It was brutally complex. 17 different incantations that had to be cast in perfect sequence while channeling pure weave energy through her body. One mistake, and she'd simply cease existing, dissolved across infinite dimensions with no anchor point, no legacy, just nothing. You're a natural, Vajra said, after Fenna completed the practice run for the 5th time without error. Wild magic sorcerers usually struggle with precise rituals, but you're adapting beautifully. I'm motivated, Fenna replied dryly. As dawn broke on the 3rd day, they gathered at Dragonspear Crater. The crystal formation had grown massive, a tower of twisted dimensional energy 50 feet tall, pulsing with light from 100 different realities. Through its translucent surface, they could see glimpses of other worlds. A burning sky, an ocean of blood, a city of living crystal, an endless void. Laryl addressed the assembled crowd, mages, priests, soldiers, and citizens who'd come to witness. Today, Fenna Emberclaw will perform a feat of heroism without precedent. She will seal a wound in reality itself, at cost of her own existence in our world. Let no one forget her sacrifice. Let no bard's tale diminish what she gives us today. Fenna barely heard the speech. She was focused on the ritual, the 17 incantations echoing through her mind. She drank the weave essence, feeling it burn through her veins like liquid starlight. Torvin stepped forward, offering his cracked hammer. Torm's blessing goes with you. May you find peace in eternity. Silra presented an arrow inscribed with prayers to Sylvanus. The forest remembers its guardians. Even Sirana approached, eyes red from crying. I'm sorry it came to this. If there were any other way... There isn't, Fenna said simply. And that's okay. Someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. Today, it's me. She walked toward the crystal formation, every step feeling like walking to her own execution. At the barrier's edge, she turned one last time to look at Faerun, the world she'd saved and would never see again. Then, Fenna Emberclaw stepped through the dimensional barrier and began the ritual that would make her eternal. The space between dimensions was agony made manifest. Fenna's physical form began dissolving the instant she crossed the barrier. Scales peeled away into streams of probability. Flesh became translucent, then transparent, then composed of pure magical energy. She existed in 1,000 states simultaneously. Burning, freezing, falling, flying, screaming, silent. But the weave essence held her together. Barely. She forced her fragmenting consciousness to focus on the first incantation. Anarsela Thum, Kalesh Vartum. The words came from her lips, tongue, throat, and directly from her dissolving soul. Around her, the space between dimensions reacted. She could see everything from this vantage point. Faerun, stable and solid. The abyss, churning with demonic chaos. The 9 hells, ordered in their tyranny. The far realm, incomprehensible and hostile. And dozens of other realities, all bleeding toward the wound Zedd had created. And there, so drifting in the cosmic debris, she saw him. Lord Zedd's consciousness, shattered but not destroyed, clung to existence through sheer spite. He had no body, no staff, barely any coherent thought. But his essence remained, a knot of rage and ambition that refused to dissipate. He sensed her immediately. You. His fragmented thoughts scraped across her mind like broken glass. The Dragonborn who ruined everything. Fenna continued the second incantation, feeling the ritual begin to take hold. Energy from her dissolving form started weaving itself into the dimensional barrier, creating the first threads of a permanent seal. You think you've won, Zedd's consciousness attacked, trying to disrupt her concentration. You're dying, dissolving into nothing. While I endure, I always endure. And when I rebuild myself, when I find a way back, I'll turn your world into a monument to my vengeance. Third incantation. Fenna's awareness expanded, touching the edges of multiple realities simultaneously. She could feel the wound now, not just the crystal formation in Faerun, but the tear in the cosmic fabric itself. It was massive, growing, hungry for reality to consume. Stop fighting, Zedd's voice became almost pleading. Let the wound open. Let the dimensions collapse. At least then we'll both be free of this torture. At least then— Shut up, Fenna managed to speak despite having no lungs, no vocal cords. I'm working. Fourth incantation. Fifth. The ritual was consuming her faster now, transforming her essence into pure anchoring energy. She could feel herself spreading across the dimensional barrier like roots through soil, to becoming part of the structure that kept realities separate. But Zedd was fighting back. His shattered consciousness attacked with everything he had left. Memories weaponized into psychological warfare. She saw visions of the Power Rangers defeating him, felt his humiliation and rage, witnessed his conquests across dimensions, the worlds he'd destroyed, the beings he'd transmuted, experienced his absolute certainty that he was destined to rule everything. You were never destined for anything, Fenna said, continuing the sixth incantation even as her sense of self began to fragment. You were just a tyrant with power you didn't earn, destroying things you didn't understand, claiming rights you never had. I was an emperor. You were a monster, and now you're nothing. Seventh incantation. Eighth. The pain was beyond description now. More Fenna existed as concept rather than creature, awareness without form, will without flesh. But she could feel the seal taking hold, the wound beginning to close. In Faerun, the assembled witnesses watched in awe and horror as the crystal formation began to shrink. Inside its translucent structure, they could see Fenna's silhouette. Not physical anymore, but composed of silver light, spreading through the crystal like veins through a leaf. It's working, Vajra whispered. Mistra preserve us, it's actually working. But something else was happening. As the wound closed, the dimensional energies were condensing, concentrating, creating pressure that had nowhere to go. The space between dimensions couldn't simply be sealed. The energy had to be contained, channeled, stabilized. Ninth incantation. Fenna realized with cold clarity what the ritual actually required. She wasn't just sealing the wound. She was becoming a dimensional dam, holding back the pressure from infinite realities trying to bleed through, forever. Forever? Zedd's consciousness caught the thought. You'll be conscious, aware, trapped in this torture for eternity? Yes? Then you've lost. You've chosen a fate worse than death, an existence of endless agony with no escape, no rest, no peace, Fenna interrupted, continuing the 10th incantation. I'll have peace knowing everyone I love is safe, knowing the world continues, knowing no more children will be transmuted into monsters because you wanted to play emperor. She could feel Zedd's consciousness recoiling, unable to comprehend that kind of selflessness. In his reality, power was everything. Sacrifice was weakness. The idea that someone would choose eternal suffering to protect others was incomprehensible to him. 11th incantation, 12th. The wound was half-sealed now, but the pressure was immense. Fenna's anchoring consciousness spread wider, deeper, becoming interwoven with the fundamental barriers between dimensions. And then she felt something unexpected. Other presences. The souls of everyone Zedd had transmuted. Fragments, 3 voices. Kelson's devotion. The fallen soldiers from Dragonspear. The kobolds, the adventurers, the innocent people whose only crime was being available raw materials for a tyrant's ambition. They were here, caught in the dimensional currents, unable to move on because their deaths had been too unnatural, too twisted by reality-warping magic. "Join me," Fenna called to them, her voice echoing across the space between dimensions. "Help me seal this wound. Become part of the barrier. Find purpose in protecting the world he tried to destroy." One by one they came. Fragments of souls, wisps of consciousness, echoes of people who died screaming. They merged with Fenna's anchoring presence, adding their strength to the seal. What had been one dragonborn sorcerer became a collective. Hundreds of Zedd's victims united in final defiance. "No!" Zedd's consciousness raged. "You're mine. Your souls are mine. I transmuted you. We belong to ourselves," Fragment's 3 voices declared, "and we choose to end you." The collective surged forward, and Zedd's consciousness was pulled into the sealing ritual. He fought with desperate fury, but shattered as he was. He couldn't resist the combined will of everyone he'd murdered. 13th incantation. 14th. The wound shrank rapidly now, fed by righteous rage and collective sacrifice. Zedd's essence was woven into the seal, not as an anchor, but as a prisoner, bound forever within the very barrier he'd tried to destroy. "You can't do this," his voice was fading, fragmenting further. "I am Lord Zedd, Emperor of—" "You're a cautionary tale," Fenna said coldly, "a reminder of what happens when ambition becomes tyranny. And now you'll spend eternity as the thing you hated most, a servant. You'll be part of the barrier that protects Farron from threats like you. You'll feel every would-be invader turned back, every dimensional breach prevented, every world saved. And you'll know it's because of your failure." Zedd's scream echoed across dimensions as the 15th incantation bound him into the seal. In Farron, the crystal formation collapsed inward, shrinking from 50 feet to 20 to 10 to 5. The witnesses held their breath as the dimensional energies condensed into a final, stable form. 16th incantation. Fenna felt her individual consciousness dissolving completely now, merging with the collective of Zedd's victims. They were becoming something new. Not quite a deity, not quite a natural force, but a conscious barrier that would guard the dimensional wound forever. One incantation remained, but before she could speak it, a new presence manifested in the space between dimensions. Mystra herself, in her full divine glory, appeared before the sealing collective. You have done well," the goddess of magic said, her voice resonating with cosmic authority. "But you need not suffer eternally. I can transform this seal into something gentler, a peaceful watch rather than endless agony. You would still be bound here, still be guardians, but in a state of restful awareness. Dreaming guards who wake only when needed." Fenna's fragmenting consciousness considered. Eternal agony or eternal peace. Still trapped, still separated from life but without the suffering. "What's the cost?" she asked, knowing gods never gave gifts freely. "The barrier will be slightly weaker. Not enough to fail, but enough that particularly powerful dimensional threats might occasionally slip through. Entities on Zedd's level could force their way past if they tried hard enough." "Then no," Fenna decided immediately. "Yes, we chose this sacrifice to prevent another Zedd. Making it easier for the next tyrant defeats the entire purpose." Fragment's 3 voices agreed. So did Kelson's devotion and the soldier's honor. Every soul in the collective chose suffering over compromise. Mystra smiled with profound sadness and pride. "Then I grant you this instead. When Farron no longer needs you, when the age of planar invasions ends and dimensional stability is restored, you will be released. Not destroyed, but free to move on to whatever afterlife awaits. Your watch will not be eternal. Only very, very long." "How long?" "Centuries, perhaps millennia. I cannot say. But it will end." Fenna felt the collective relax slightly. Not eternal. Just very long. That was manageable. That was bearable. "Thank you," she said. The goddess of magic touched the sealing collective with divine power, and the agony dimmed to a manageable ache. Still present, still constant, but no longer overwhelming. A price that could be paid without losing all sanity. Maestra withdrew, leaving them to complete the work. 17th Incantation. Final words. Ultimate Binding. Keltharis Animar. Sailtum voth eternal. The wound sealed completely. In Farron, the crystal formation solidified into a single pillar of translucent material, 20 feet tall and 5 feet wide. Inside, barely visible, was the silhouette of a dragonborn sorcerer surrounded by hundreds of smaller lights. The collective of victims turned guardians. The dimensional breach was sealed. The bleeding between realities stopped. Faerun was safe. Vajra approached the pillar carefully, placing her hand against its smooth surface. She could feel the consciousness within, awake, aware, in pain, but resolute. Protecting, watching, enduring. Rest well, hero, the Blackstaff whispered. Your watch has only begun, but you will not stand it alone. We will remember. We will honor. And when your long duty finally ends, all of Farron will celebrate your homecoming. Inside the pillar, Fenna's consciousness settled into its eternal vigil. She could feel Zedd's essence trapped in the deepest part of the seal, raging impotently, forever bound to protect the world he'd tried to conquer. The irony was delicious. She could also feel the other souls, fragments, 3 voices singing together, Kelson praying to Maestra, the soldiers standing watch as they had in life. They were together. They were purposeful. Fine, and though the pain never quite faded, they bore it knowing what they protected. Years would pass, decades, centuries, but they would endure. And in the distant future, when their duty finally ended, they would be remembered not as victims, but as the guardians who saved everything. 20 years after the sealing, Waterdeep had changed. The Dragonspear Pillar, as it came to be known, stood as both memorial and warning. A temple complex had been built around it, staffed by priests of Maestra who maintained constant vigil. Adventurers made pilgrimages to touch its surface and feel the faint warmth of the consciousnesses within. Mothers brought children to teach them about sacrifice. Bards composed songs that never quite captured the enormity of what Fenna and the collective had done. And the world had adapted to Lord Zedd's legacy. A transmutation magic was now heavily regulated across Faerun. The Council of Mages had established strict protocols for any spell that altered living matter. Wild magic zones were mapped and quarantined. And a new order of dimensional guards, the Wardens of the Threshold, patrolled known planar weak points, ready to respond if another extraplanar threat emerged. Torvin Battlehammer, now gray-bearded and bearing the scars of 2 decades of continued service, led the Wardens. He visited the pillar every year on the anniversary of the sealing, placing fresh flowers at its base and updating Fenna's consciousness on the state of the world she'd saved. The Sword Coast is peaceful, he reported during the 20th anniversary gathering. Around him stood hundreds of witnesses, survivors of Dragonspear, on new generations who'd grown up with the pillar as landmark, and representatives from every nation that had benefited from Fenna's sacrifice. The Gentarum are fractured and mostly contained. The Harpers continue their work, and no dimensional breaches have occurred since you sealed this wound. Your watch holds strong. Inside the pillar, Fenna's consciousness stirred at the familiar voice. 20 years felt like 20 centuries in her stretched perception of time, but also like 20 heartbeats. Time was strange when you existed outside normal reality. She could feel the world beyond through the dimensional barriers she'd become part of. Every planar boundary, every thin point in reality, every attempted breach. Most were natural fluctuations, the universe breathing. But occasionally, something tested the barriers with intelligence behind it. 3 times in 20 years, entities from other dimensions had tried to force their way into Farron. Twice they'd been demons, lesser princes of the abyss seeking new territories. Once it had been something worse, a creature from the far realm that defied description, drawn by the scent of a wounded reality. Each time, the collective had awakened fully, transforming from dreaming guardians into active defenders. They'd reinforced the barriers, turned back the invaders, suffered through intensified agony as dimensional pressure spiked. Then, threats neutralized, they'd returned to their restful watch. Zedd's consciousness had been forced to help each time. His essence was so thoroughly woven into the seal that when the collective activated, he activated too, compelled to defend the very world he'd tried to conquer. Fenna found grim satisfaction in that. Even in eternal imprisonment, the Emperor served a purpose beyond his own ambition. But something was different about this anniversary. Fenna felt it through the dimensional currents. A disturbance in the planar fabric, but not an invasion. Something subtler. Someone was searching, probing the barriers not to break through but to understand them. To learn from Zedd's failure. Fragment, she called to the three voices that shared her vigil. Do you feel that? We do, they harmonized. Intelligence, purpose. Not hostile yet, but studying us. Learning our patterns. Preparing, Kelson's voice added, his priestly insight sharp even in this state. Someone in another dimension is analyzing what Zedd did wrong, on planning a better invasion. The collective stirred uneasily. They could defend against brute force, against demons and aberrations trying to smash through the barriers. But a patient, intelligent adversary who studied and adapted? That was more dangerous. We should warn them, one of the soldiers suggested. How? Another voice asked. We can't speak to the outside anymore, can't manifest. We're guardians, not messengers. Maestra could relay it, Fenna considered. The goddess monitors us constantly. If we... She stopped. A new presence had appeared in the dimensional currents. Not trying to invade Faerun, but addressing the collective directly. The voice that emerged was sophisticated, cultured, terrifyingly intelligent. Greetings, Guardians. I am Archon Vral, a dimensional mathematician of the Confluence, a coalition of realities seeking to understand and stabilize the multiverse. I've been studying the breach Lord Zedd created and your remarkable solution. Might we speak? The collective debated rapidly, hundreds of voices analyzing the contact. Was this genuine? A trap? An attempt to weaken the seal through diplomacy? Fenna made the decision. We're listening. Excellent. First, my congratulations. Your sealing technique is unprecedented, transforming consciousness into dimensional anchoring. Brilliant, if horrifically sacrificial. But I must inform you of a complication you cannot perceive from your position. Explain. Lord Zedd's invasion was not random. His planar breach followed a pattern, a recurring cycle of dimensional instability that affects the entire multiverse. Every few centuries, the barriers between realities weaken naturally, creating windows for crossover events. Zedd's arrival coincided with such a window, which is why his breach was so catastrophic. The collective processed this. When is the next window? 60 years. And it will be worse. Much worse. The damage Zedd caused created resonance patterns that will amplify the next cycle. Instead of one or two breaches, you could see dozens, hundreds, all across your world simultaneously. Horror rippled through the collective. They were bound to this single point, this one wound. They couldn't defend the entire planet. You're saying our sacrifice was insufficient, Fenna said coldly. No, you saved your world from immediate collapse. But the long-term solution requires something more. The Confluence proposes an alliance, and we have dimensional stabilization technology that could reinforce Faerun's planar boundaries permanently. In exchange, we ask for knowledge, a detailed understanding of your sealing technique, which could help us protect other threatened realities. And we should trust you because you shouldn't. Trust is earned, not given. But consider, if I wished to invade your world, I could have done so at any point during these 20 years. Instead, I'm offering assistance. My civilization has witnessed 17 different realities collapse into dimensional chaos. We're trying to prevent the 18th. Inside the pillar, Fenna consulted with the collective. This decision was beyond them. It required the living, the leaders of Faerun, who could evaluate such an offer properly. We'll relay your message, she finally said, but we make no promises. If this is deception, if you attempt to exploit our world's vulnerabilities, we will defend it to our last fragment of consciousness. I would expect nothing less from guardians of your caliber. Maestra is listening. She'll convey my offer to your world's leaders. And guardians, thank you for your service, for your sacrifice. You represent the best of what conscious beings can achieve. The presence withdrew, leaving the collective in troubled contemplation. Outside, in the material world, Mistra's high priest suddenly stiffened during the memorial service. His eyes glowed with divine light as the goddess spoke through him, relaying the entire conversation. The assembled crowd erupted in shocked discussion. Vajra immediately began barking orders for an emergency council. Laryl dispatched messengers to every major city. And Torvin placed his hand on the pillar, drawing strength from the guardians within. You've given us warning, he said quietly. Now it's our turn to defend what you've protected. Rest, heroes. We'll handle this. The memorial service transformed into a war council. Representatives from the Lord's Alliance, the Harpers, the Gentarum, the churches of every major deity, and independent archmages debated long into the night. Some argued for rejecting Archon Vral's offer as obvious deception. Others pointed out that if the prediction of increased dimensional instability was accurate, they couldn't afford to refuse potential help. The debate grew heated, factional tensions resurfacing. It was Remy who finally cut through the chaos. We're asking the wrong question, the Harper declared. We're debating whether to trust Archon Vral when we should be preparing for the worst, regardless. If the dimensional windows are natural phenomena, they'll occur whether we ally with the confluence or not. So we prepare, we research, we build defenses. And if Vral's offer proves genuine, we consider it then. But we act as if we're alone. Laryl nodded slowly. A sound strategy. Vajra, what would we need? A network of dimensional anchors across Farron. The Blackstaff responded immediately. Not as powerful as the Dragonspear pillar, but sufficient to stabilize major population centers. We'd need volunteers, mages willing to bind themselves to specific locations as guardians. Not eternal service like Fenna's, but significant commitment. Years, possibly decades. You'll have volunteers, a new voice announced, yet everyone turned to see a young dragonborn woman stepping forward from the crowd. Her scales were bronze where Fenna's had been copper, but the determination in her eyes was identical. I'm C3 Emberclaw, Fenna's younger sister. She saved the world. The least I can do is help protect it. Others stepped forward. Young mages inspired by Fenna's sacrifice. Veterans of Dragonspear seeking redemption for falling to Zedd's tricks. Even a few former Gentrim who'd witnessed the cost of ambition unchecked. By dawn, they had 43 volunteers willing to become lesser guardians, binding themselves to dimensional anchor points across the Sword Coast. The training began immediately. Vajra personally instructed each volunteer in the anchoring techniques, carefully modified to be less permanently sacrificial than Fenna's original ritual. Or they would serve 10-year terms, rotating in shifts, maintaining constant vigil over Farron's dimensional boundaries. And slowly, year by year, the network took shape. 5 years after Archon Vral's warning, the first anchor points were established in Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, and Luskan. 10 years in, the network extended to Kalimport, Athkatla, and even distant Karatur. 15 years saw magical academies incorporating dimensional studies into their curriculum, training new generations of potential guardians. By the time the predicted dimensional window approached, 40 years after the sealing, Farron was as prepared as mortal effort could make it. The Wardens of the Threshold stood ready at every anchor point. Archmages had developed new spells specifically for repelling planar incursions. And the gods themselves had agreed to coordinate their responses, setting aside divine politics for the common defense. And at the center of it all, the Dragonspear pillar pulsed with steady light, Fenna and her collective maintaining their eternal watch. When the dimensional window finally opened, it was worse than predicted. 47 simultaneous breaches across Faerun. Demons, devils, aberrations, and things without names tried to flood through. But they met a world transformed by 20 years of preparation and 40 years of constant vigilance. The anchor network activated in perfect synchronization. Lesser guardians reinforced dimensional barriers while adventurers fought the few creatures that made it through. Divine power hammered the largest breaches while archmages wove counterspells of unprecedented complexity. And at Dragonspear, Fenna's collective blazed like a star, drawing on 2 decades of accumulated power to reinforce the entire network simultaneously. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, Farron had held. Casualties numbered in the hundreds rather than thousands. Damages were localized rather than catastrophic. And most importantly, every breach had been sealed without requiring new permanent sacrifices. As the dimensional window closed and the barrier stabilized, Archon Vryl's presence manifested once more, visible now to the assembled defenders. The dimensional mathematician appeared as pure geometry, shifting angles and impossible mathematics made briefly solid. His voice carried genuine admiration. Remarkable. You've achieved in 40 years what took my civilization 3 centuries. Your Guardian network is crude compared to our technology, but its effectiveness is undeniable. And the Dragonspear pillar? I've never seen consciousness wielded as dimensional architecture with such precision. Is your offer of alliance still open? Laryl asked, now 70 years old but still sharp as ever. It is. But I suspect you no longer need it quite as desperately. You've proven capable of defending yourselves. Still, the Confluence would value friendship with a reality that produces heroes like your guardians. Cultural exchange, magical research cooperation, mutual defense treaties. All possibilities if you're interested. Vajra stepped forward, ancient now, but still Blackstaff. We'll consider it, but on our terms with our safeguards. We've learned the cost of trusting too quickly. As well you should. I'll await your decision. And Guardians, Vryl's presence turned toward the pillar. Your watch continues to inspire across dimensions. The Confluence honors your sacrifice. The mathematician faded, leaving Farron to celebrate its victory and mourn its losses. Inside the pillar, Fenna felt a change. Not in her duty, that remained constant, but in the weight of it. For 40 years, she'd borne the burden of being Farron's only dimensional guardian. Now she shared that burden with dozens of others. The anchor network took pressure off her collective, allowing them to sink deeper into their restful watch. We did it, Fragment's 3 voices sang. We held long enough for them to build something lasting. And they remember us, Kelson added. Not as cautionary tales, but as heroes who bought them time. The bards still can't get the songs right, though, one of the soldiers joked, their humor intact even after 40 years of eternal service. Fenna smiled, or the consciousness equivalent of smiling. Give them another 40 years. Maybe they'll figure it out. Deep within the seal, Zedd's essence seethed impotently. He'd been forced to help defend Farron during the dimensional window, compelled by the binding to protect what he'd once tried to destroy. The humiliation was absolute. But even his rage was fading now, worn down by decades of purposeless imprisonment. Slowly, inevitably, the Emperor who'd conquered dimensions was being reduced to just another piece of the barrier. His identity eroding, his memories dissolving, his grand ambitions becoming meaningless static. In a few more centuries, there would be nothing left of Lord Zedd but energy in the seal, and even that would serve a noble purpose. Perfect justice, Fenna thought. Perfect peace. Her watch continued. The centuries passed like heartbeats in the pillar. Kingdoms rose and fell. The Sword Coast weathered wars, plagues, and the inevitable march of mortal ambition. Magic evolved, incorporating lessons learned from Zedd's invasion into fundamental arcane theory. The Wardens of the Threshold became a permanent institution, respected across Farron as the first line of defense against dimensional threats. And through it all, Fenna Emberclaw and her collective stood watch. They witnessed everything through the dimensional barriers they'd become. Saw young Scythri Emberclaw rise to become Archmage of Waterdeep, dedicating her life to honoring her sister's sacrifice. Watched as Torvin Battlehammer finally laid down his cracked hammer at age 93. His last words a prayer for the Guardians who'd never stop fighting. Felt Vajra Safar's final breath as she passed the Blackstaff to a worthy successor, whispering gratitude to the dragonborn hero she'd helped transform into legend. 300 years after the sealing, the dimensional windows had become predictable, manageable. The anchor network expanded to cover all of Faerun, then spread to other continents as knowledge of the Guardian technique proliferated. Volunteers rotated through 10-year terms of service, their sacrifices honored but finite, their burdens shared across thousands rather than borne by one collective. 500 years in, dimensional travel became routine. The Confluence's alliance had proven genuine, opening trade and cultural exchange between realities. Faerun learned from worlds that had solved problems it still struggled with. In return, it taught the Guardian techniques that had saved it from collapse. And slowly, inevitably, the age of planar invasions ended. Not with a dramatic final battle, but with gradual stabilization. As understanding of dimensional mechanics improved, as barriers were reinforced through cooperative effort across realities, the natural weakening cycles that had allowed entities like Zedd to cross became increasingly rare. 700 years after Fenna's sacrifice, the last major breach occurred. A minor demon lord attempting invasion through outdated methods. The anchor network sealed it within minutes. No casualties, no heroes needed. It was then that Maestra appeared before the pillar, her avatar manifesting in the temple complex that had become one of Faerun's holiest sites. "Your watch is ending," the goddess of magic announced to the assembled priests and pilgrims. "The dimensional barriers have stabilized. The threats you were bound to defend against no longer threaten. It's time to fulfill my promise." Inside the pillar, the collective stirred from their restful vigil. 7 centuries of service, 700 years of maintaining barriers, fighting off occasional incursions, enduring the constant ache of existing between dimensions. "Is it really over?" Fenna asked, her consciousness so diffused across the seal that she barely remembered being an individual anymore. "Your duty is complete," Maestra confirmed. "I'm offering you 3 choices. First, I can dissolve the collective peacefully. You'll move on to whatever afterlife awaits. Kelemvor's judgment for the faithful, the fugue plane for the uncertain, or divine reward for those who earned it through service. Second, you can remain as you are, not bound by duty but choosing to continue watching over this place. Some guardians prefer eternal service to the uncertainty of what comes after. And third," the goddess smiled, "I can restore you to life. Not as you were, those bodies dissolved long ago, but as something new. You've become part of the weave itself. I could give you physical forms again, shaped by your experiences. You'd be forever changed, bearing the marks of your sacrifice, but alive, mortal, free to live out whatever years remain." The collective debated. 700 years of shared consciousness had blurred their individual identities, but cores of self remained. Fenna still remembered copper scales and wild magic. Fragment still carried 3 distinct personalities. Kelson still held his faith. The soldiers still bore their honor. "A vote," Fenna proposed. "Everyone in the collective decides for themselves. We've been together this long, but our ends should be our own." They voted. 43 chose to move on to the afterlife, ready for rest and whatever came next. They'd earned their peace, and they claimed it gladly. 27 chose to remain as eternal guardians, finding purpose in their watch that transcended mortality's appeal. They would become permanent fixtures of the Dragon Spear pillar, conscious anchors maintaining the seal not from duty but from choice. And 136, including Fenna, Fragment, Kelson, and most of the soldiers, chose life. Maestra's power suffused the pillar, carefully separating those who wished to leave from those who'd stay. The process took 3 days, the goddess working with delicate precision to untangle consciousnesses that had been interwoven for centuries. When it was complete, the pillar split. The eternal guardians remained at its core, their light steady and peaceful. And around the temple, 136 new forms materialized. They were human-shaped but clearly touched by divine power. Their skins shimmered with the iridescence of the weave itself. Their eyes held depths that spoke of centuries observing reality's foundations. And each bore unique marks of their service. Fenna's scales were now crystalline. Fragment had been restored to 3 separate bodies that moved in perfect synchronization, or Kelson's priestly symbols were literally part of his flesh, They were the dimensionally reborn, neither quite mortal nor divine, but something in between, changed irrevocably by their sacrifice, yet granted the gift of continued existence. Fenna took her first breath in 700 years. It tasted like starlight and possibility. She looked at her crystalline claws, felt wild magic crackling beneath her skin. Different now, refined by centuries of channeling pure weave energy. Then she looked up at Waterdeep in the distance, a city she'd saved but never expected to see again. "What do we do now?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice rusty from disuse. "Whatever we want," Fenna replied, wonder in her voice. "We've done our duty, saved the world, endured the impossible. Now we get to live." Some of the dimensionally reborn chose to stay near Dragonspear, becoming priests and teachers, sharing knowledge gained from their unique perspective. Others scattered across Faerun, seeking lives they'd given up centuries ago, finding descendants or starting fresh. Fenna traveled to Waterdeep, to the plinth where her statue stood. Older now, weathered by 7 centuries of seasons, but still bearing the inscription she'd requested. Fenna Emberclaw, terrified, determined, hero. She touched the cold stone, remembering the night before her sacrifice. Remy's words about dying inside versus dying with purpose. The choice that had seemed impossible then, but had led to this moment. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the memorial. "Watched over them. Made it mean something." A voice behind her. "And we kept ours. I never forgot. Never diminished. Never stopped honoring." She turned to find an elderly woman in Harper Blacks, Remy's great-great-great-granddaughter, bearing the same sharp eyes and determined jaw. "My ancestor wrote extensively about you. Left instructions that every generation of our family should visit your statue, should remember what you gave up." "She survived the dimensional window?" Fenna asked. "Died at 87, surrounded by friends, having lived a full life because you made that possible." The Harper smiled. "Welcome back, hero. Waterdeep owes you 7 centuries of back pay." Fenna laughed. Actually laughed, the sound strange and wonderful after so long. "I'll settle for a drink at the Yawning Portal. Durnan's great-great-great-grandson runs it now, but the drinks are free for dimensionally reborn, on forever." They walked together through a city transformed by centuries but still fundamentally itself. Still Waterdeep, city of splendors, jewel of the Sword Coast. The place Fenna had died to protect, now thriving beyond anything she'd imagined. And in the Dragonspear Pillar, the eternal guardians who'd chosen to remain settled into their watch with quiet satisfaction. They'd seen their companions freed, their sacrifice validated, their world secured. Now they could rest easy, maintaining the seal not from obligation but from love for what they protected. Deep within the barrier, Lord Zedd's essence had finally dissolved completely. 7 centuries of forced service had eroded every trace of the Emperor's identity. His consciousness, his memories, his ambitions, all gone. I transformed into pure dimensional energy that served the very world he'd tried to conquer. The tyrant who'd claimed inevitable victory had achieved the ultimate defeat, becoming useful. Fenna stood atop Waterdeep's walls that evening, looking out over the city as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Fragment's 3 bodies stood beside her, harmonizing a song they'd learned during their watch. Other dimensionally reborn gathered, sharing stories, making plans, adjusting to having futures again. "Do you regret it?" Fragment asked. "The sacrifice? The centuries of service?" Fenna thought about it carefully. "No. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Zedd forced that choice. But I don't regret making it. We saved something worth saving." She spread her crystalline claws, unfeeling wild magic dance between her fingers, power refined by experience beyond mortal comprehension. "And look what we became. Not just survivors, not just heroes. We're living proof that sacrifice can be transformative rather than just destructive. That choosing to protect others elevates you into something greater than you were." "Think anyone else will try invading?" one of the soldiers wondered. "Probably," Fenna said. "Ambition is eternal. Someone will always want what isn't theirs, will always think they can take it by force. But now, Faerun knows how to respond. The Anchor Network stands. The Wardens patrol. And if needed, Dimensional Guardians can be called again. But not us, Fragment noted. Not us, Fena agreed. We did our part, stood our watch, earned our rest. The next generation can bear that burden if it comes. As darkness fell and Waterdeep's lights began to glow, Fena felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 centuries. Simple contentment. Not the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled, but the quiet joy of being alive, being free, being among friends in a world that remembered and honored what she'd given. Lord Zedd had come to Faerun seeking conquest, demanding submission, treating life as raw material for his ambitions. He'd been powerful, ruthless, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for victory, and he'd lost. Not just to superior force, but to something he could never understand. People choosing to protect each other at tremendous personal cost. Heroes who became guardians. Victims who became defenders. A dragonborn sorcerer who'd been terrified but determined. Who'd made the impossible choice and transformed it into eternal legend. The multiverse had learned from Zedd's failure. Dimensional invasions would always be possible, but now they'd face worlds prepared, protected by guardians who understood that true strength came not from dominating others but from sacrificing for them. Fena Emberclaw had saved Faerun, and in doing so, she'd helped transform the entire multiverse's understanding of heroism. Not bad for a wild magic sorcerer who'd just wanted to live. She raised a crystalline claw toward the stars, toward the infinite realities she'd glimpsed during her watch, and smiled. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night, she whispered to the cosmos. And we kept it burning.